do a little bit of an introduction anyway, so as folks come through, we can and they can pick up.
Great. Why don't we do that? So, welcome everybody. Delighted that we've got some people joining us on our webinar. I'm Charlie Ponsonby. I am CEO and co-founder at Plandec, and Will Lytle, who's our COO, who looks after all our customer relationships and all the work we're doing in this space, is also on the call. He's going to talk much more than I will. I'm sure you're glad to know. But I thought I would just set the scene, if I may. And so I'm delighted that you're all coming to our webinar, and the title has been chosen quite carefully, I think. And it is all about, I think, the next few minutes trying to understand the difference between the hype that's out there and the reality in terms of transitioning to AI-augmented engineering, and particularly the hype around this sort of hyper-productive, we call it a hyper-productive state, that certain enterprises are claiming to have achieved, and we've seen it in pockets. And if indeed it does exist, which it does, how do you achieve that state of sort of hyper productivity in AI augmented engineering? And the next few minutes are going to be all about that process and how we, in some ways, Plandec might help in that process. So I think before I touch on, so to reiterate on the sort of order of the day, I'm just going to touch a little bit on what we're seeing currently. I know some of our viewers are very experienced in this area, and some of this they will know only too well. But I think it's worth just touching on this. This market is moving so fast. What have we seen in the last 6 months? And then specifically, we'll dig into a bit more detail, a couple of case studies of what we'd call hyper productivity. And then trying to unpick the hype from the reality, if you like, and then offering most of the session will be on a kind of practical guide to how we can help, or how you can help yourselves, I suppose, accelerate this transition to AI augmented engineering. So the analogy we've kind of used for the whole session is it is a bit like a gold rush, and there's a manic state with an awful lot going on, some people striking gold and some people not. And I suppose the purpose of this is to try and help us all strike gold. But just a second on Plandec. I know hopefully on the call we do have a few of our existing customers who know only too well what we do. But Plandec, for those who don't know, is an SEI tool, which is a software engineering intelligence tool. And as the name suggests, it is all about extracting the rich data that sits across the SDLC, across those tool sets that you know and love, and joining the dots across that data, and very importantly, adding intelligence to that data, and serving it back at 3 levels to sort of leaders and managers and teams within an engineering ecosystem, so that you can drive performance improvement very rapidly. So it's sort of leveraging the insight that's lurking within your DevOps tools to help you deliver faster, more reliably, better quality, and so on. So Plandec is, as an organization, we work with a lot of high-performing engineering teams and medium-performing engineering teams, and we get a sort of ringside view of what good looks like and what one needs to do to drive performance improvement at a steady state, but also what one needs to do to think about improving productivity at this time of very rapid change. So we are quite close to this subject, know and love it, and I'm very happy to share our observations. So from my perspective, just to set the scene for Will, and again, a lot of you will know this already, but even in the last 6 months, there's been an absolute explosion of use of Gen AI tools, and it is seen as the fastest adoption of a B2B tool ever, period. And so we've seen now adoption rates of about 95% of these tools in some shape or form, and that really has grown almost by half in the last 6 or so months. But what I think is clear, despite this sort of very rapid run to the sprint towards AI augmented engineering, the sort of holy grail benefits of hyperproductivity are certainly not being felt by many. And if probably there's more of a kind of expectation versus reality gap for the majority. And 6 months ago or so, when we tested the market, lots of adopters were saying, well, we're really looking to increase quality as part of our reason for adopting Gen AI tools. And we definitely saw this sort of quality paradox where, in fact, there are more concerns about potential security risks and adverse effects on quality from adopting these tools rather than augmenting or improving quality. But that said, I suppose the message for us, and again, it won't be news to many of us on the call, that this really is systemic change afoot. And this merits a really focused look by leadership in all our organizations to treat this. This isn't business as usual. This needs to be treated as a rapid period of change that needs very careful attention over and above business as usual. So, in a nutshell, I think this 1849 California gold rush analogy is very apposite. It's a huge opportunity. The pace of change really is unparalleled. We are seeing a huge variation in approach, and we'll talk a little bit about that. I think the frightening thing, we're seeing very few guardrails and the security implications of that, and very little measurement, and therefore probably an increasing concern over the risks as well as the potential reward. But when we come to the reward, we are absolutely seeing some leaders in this area, some of whom are on this call, and they are starting to pull ahead, and they really will pull ahead an awful lot further in 2026. And they're starting to realize some very significant gains. So a few data points here, which I won't dwell on, but I think the one here at the bottom, that 60% starting to use these tools within the last year. It's a phenomenal rate of growth, and you can pick up a couple of these points if I dwell on here for a second. But basically, it's a pace of change point that I want to make here. And then in terms of maturity and adoption, again, we're seeing a very big difference. The more conversant members of this audience will understand this very well, but clearly we're seeing people just dipping their toes in, using these tools in what we might call just ask mode. So literally using it as a lookup, through to sort of quite rudimentary assistance of ongoing code writing, through to more agentic, what we might call Mr. Karthik coined the term vibe coding, through to the absolute more autonomous use of agents such as Devin to do larger tasks in a more autonomous way. Now, the people who are doing that are few and far between, but there is no doubt that everybody is on this journey, and they're moving up these stages or hybrid elements of these stages very rapidly. And so we just want to talk a little bit about what we're seeing in that regard. As such, before I just hand over to Will, you will see he's going to show you some survey results that we had back from 25 CIOs, forgive me, that we spoke to in Munich just 2 or 3 weeks ago. And these are the questions we asked them. So we thought it may be interesting to ask you all the same questions and then compare how you stand versus the state of play across the CIOs we spoke to, who are a pretty representative bunch of larger, sort of small enterprise, larger technology-oriented businesses across Europe. And there's 25 of them, as I mentioned. So the first question we thought we'd ask you is just this question of breadth of adoption. And Amni, are we firing this up in the background? I'm afraid I can't see anything at the moment. Or William, are these questions, can people see these questions? I hope so. So will let me know if they can. So the first question is, how widely have you rolled out Gen AI tools across your organization? There's a question also whether that's ad hoc or in a very focused way. But basically, I think, are we seeing these questions? Okay, so the first question is, less than 10%, 10 to 50, and so on. Have a quick think about that. The second question is, how are your teams mainly using these tools? Sort of maturity of adoption. Is it very basic asking? Is it starting just to be used to assist, sort of finish the sentence type way, or is it more towards the vibe coding, or is it in a very autonomous agentic way? Second question. Third question, I think very interestingly, is what engineering impacts are you looking to achieve from this great journey towards AI augmented engineering? Is it about velocity? Is it about quality? Is it about predictability of output? Is it about better focus of expensive resource on value creating activities and roadmap? Is it about tackling all that technical debt you have, or is it about looking after your people and recognizing that this is a very attractive thing for an engineering team to be able to use, or is it for other reasons? And then fourthly, beyond the sort of engineering impact, what are the sort of business outcomes that you're looking to achieve? Is it all about revenue? Is it about speed to market? Is it about cost reduction? Is it about happy customers? Is it a defensive play against competition? And the final question, I hope you're all seeing these. Forgive me, I can't see what everyone's seeing. And this is very pertinent, and will talk about this a lot. And this is really where we think the answer to all of this lies, frankly, is what are the biggest barriers that you're facing in achieving these outcomes? Is it around the tooling you're using and the incompatibility of that tooling? Is it about actually how you're architected and how the code base is set up? Is that making it hard for these agentic tools to cope with that environment? Is it a documentation tool? Is it a kind of broader workflow and process tool that actually the coding element is not our problem? It may be in the sort of CI/CD element of our SDLC that we have bigger problems. Is it a sort of governance and compliance and we need to get all this signed off? Or is it a training issue? So it's a people issue around training or culture, or is it other? And that will be very interesting to get everybody's perspective. I think I'll conclude there. So I think all I've done, I hope, is get across that this is not business as usual. This is very profound change. The pace of change is unprecedented, and therefore responding to that in a very focused way from leadership down, it is absolutely necessary. This is not just tweaking around the edges of a BAU SDLC, if you like, and that's my sort of contribution up front. Will, over to you.
Lovely. Thank you.
Do you want me to stop sharing?
Yeah, let's just switch up. Just can do that. Sorry, everyone. Let me just pull this up very quickly, and we'll then carry on the conversation. Great. So we're going to let the results come in and let folks finish the surveys, and we'll come back to that in a second. In the meantime, these are, as Charlie mentioned quite elegantly, there are loads of pockets of hyper productivity that definitely clients, some of them on the call today, and others that we work with are starting to experience, but they are very much limited and such. There's nobody that we work with at the moment, although there are definitely folks leading the charge on this, have really scaled this out across the organization. There are three use cases here, three examples here that we provided just from our customer base alone of different ways in which they've applied AI tooling, either in live projects or they've executed a live project and then gone back and let's rerun this project in Devin or Cursor. We're not here for free advertising, but one of the core agentic tools to see actually could we have done this from scratch, right? And the one that we spoke to recently is kind of the one at the bottom, a 4-month project which was really focused on accessibility requirements. So they had a 4-month project where they went through and they rebuilt and upgraded the website, the front end application to be adherent with certain accessibility requirements. And then they said, okay, let's now that we've done that, let's go back with, and they've got a little pilot team that's working. How can we utilize these tools and how long would it take this tool? In fact, it took them about 2 days to actually get that full application rebuilt in line with the accessibility requirements that they were trying to achieve. And then another few days that they added on top of that just to do some refactoring and refinement to get it, in theory, pretty close to production ready. So whether it was a week or a week and a half, or maybe even, let's say, 2 weeks, point being is there are definitely clients, and some of them are on the call today, that are experiencing these real pockets of hyper productivity. But there is a really big but to that. And a lot of that comes down to the context in which you're working, right? So whether it's the code base or task clarity, we know AI tools are very effective when running well-defined, simplified tasks, right? That's been their bread and butter from day one. As you start to move into more greenfield, open-ended, exploratory areas of code generation, it gets definitely a lot more complex. And certain architectures are going to lean themselves, or certain languages are going to lend themselves a little bit more towards effective use of AI tools. Some of them will still struggle, whether it's with particular LLM models or LLM models in general. Naturally, process maturity, right? So, one of the examples that we speak about a lot with clients is it's all well and good to adopt agentic AI, but if you're still deploying once a month, it's not really going to help you move the needle in terms of actually how productive you are in terms of delivering value to your customers. So there's a lot of emphasis there around the process maturity, the culture and your team behavior, understanding, different clients definitely have different experiences when it comes to adoption usage. And a lot of that is supported by the leadership as well. So having clear leadership signals, which is very strong, evidence rolling out across the business. There's one client in particular we'll talk about in a little bit, who's been very effective at driving this, not only from the top down, but across every aspect of their business and really putting somebody in charge of doing that. Whereas others that have had it a little bit more exploratory, a little bit more unstructured, have definitely seen little pockets, but they're few and far between. And it doesn't necessarily translate into a larger transition to an AI augmented organization. So the context is really, really important here. One of the case studies that, and this is something that's really influenced our thinking in the RACER framework that we're going to go into in a little bit. We have one of our customers who's a software business based here in the UK, private equity owned business, about 2,000 employees overall. And they have had, tremendous sponsorship. One of their kind of key leadership figures has actually moved into a role now of being responsible for the rollout of AI across every part of the organization. But it really started, first of all, within their SDLC, within their engineering function. And they had a very clear sense of, sorry, apologies. Just got a little bit trigger happy there. While they certainly experimented earlier on with a variety of different tools, they moved very quickly in terms of a very planned and structured rollout of semi-autonomous agentic agents within their organization. So primarily around this vibe coding. And they had one of the things that they recognized very quickly, which is something that we've definitely been inspired by, is they applied this idea of the theory of constraints to this adoption curve of AI. So it's not just about, we bought a bunch of licenses, where's our 10x productivity, but really understanding that transition to AI augmented engineering. Yes, you buy some licenses, you start using them, teams start to master how do I operationalize this, but ultimately there are going to be a number of constraints that teams face, right? Whether it's a deployment frequency constraint that we just spoke about a second ago, or other constraints, there are going to be constraints that they face that's going to prohibit them or slow them down from actually being able to transform how they deliver software, right? And so whether it's kind of tooling or code base or team and cultural issues or workflow issues or process issues, what this client did very, very effectively, which has made a material impact in terms of how quickly they've been able to move, is really in a very structured left brain sort of way identified what are the key constraints that each of our team members are facing. Let's document those. Let's categorize those. Let's address them. Let's burn them down, as you would with any particular issue that you're facing in a lot of other contexts of your business. So they're very structured in how they approach this. What that enabled them to do was not only sort of be able to manage expectations broadly within the organization, but in a very clear and structured way, be able to actually understand, okay, well, if these are the three things that are stopping for us being able to, let's say, move through cycle time faster or be able to deliver things more efficiently, what are we doing about them? Let's do that thing. Let's get rid of that constraint and move on to the next, move on to the next. And what they've then started to see is definitely some pockets of hyper productivity. So in terms of a 16% increase of PR efficiency, which is a new measure that's going to be coming up in our 2026 benchmarks. So a little bit more on that in a little bit. But first and foremost, had a really major impact on the improvement of their sprint accuracy, which was a little bit surprising. It was just actually more than improving the flow of work. It was much more focused on actually our ability to do what we say we're going to do and do that much more consistently. Why? Largely because it alleviated a lot of risk and unknowns and allowed them to actually structure their sprints and achieve them much more successfully. So I'm going to move in next to the survey results. And if I can try to get Zoom to play along with me. How do I see? Oh, we've stumbled at the first hurdle. Nope, no, we have not. Um, the results of the survey. Let me just, sorry, I'm just pulling up the survey results.
But while you do that, William, I think it's safe to say that these outliers are few and far between. And I think what the survey, as you can see on the top left there, what the survey sort of confirmed is that the majority are quite a long way behind um, seeing
There we go.
that adoption curve. But I'll hand back to you.
Thanks for the exceptional job doing a bit of filler there. um, so I think everyone can see the results now because we've shared it with the group. Now, what you're seeing on the screen, these sort of orange dots. So you imagine a room of 25 CIOs and CTOs that we were lucky to host in Munich, and we went through each of these questions, right? Broadly as a way of them being able to understand where other people are on the journey, but also learn from each other and what other constraints and challenges and objectives other organizations have at the moment when it comes to the adoption of AI. What's interesting here today is, you know, if we look at the results of people on the call today, in some ways, this doesn't surprise me because I know our customers and I know how many of them are actually really quite aggressively along the Gen AI journey. More than, what is that? I guess, what is that, 50, 66% of, so 2/3 of everyone on the call today has at least 50% of their teams currently utilizing AI, which was definitely, when we run this in Munich, that's definitely much more advanced than what we were typically. So most people that we'd spoken to previously were around that 10 to 50%. So that's very interesting, actually. In some ways, doesn't surprise me, but surprises me that doesn't surprise me. It doesn't make a lot of sense. How are you using these, right? So principally, most of the organizations that we spoke to at this conference were definitely in the sort of ask and assist phase, right? So still, whether it's kind of traditional models of using ChatGPT or even Copilot, but still within that assistant model, very few of them were actually leveraging the sort of, not, nobody was doing fully agentic. Very few people were actually doing partial agentic. Okay, whereas the group here today, definitely, I think the majority of folks are still within that sort of asking or assistance mode, but we do see a lot more folks within the vibe coding, and they use it like a virtual member. So that's, you know, not entirely your fully agentic mode, but moving in that sort of direction. So it sort of reflects, I think, a little bit. Most folks on the call today are maybe a little bit further on that journey than some of the organizations that we were speaking to at this conference. Now, point number 3, you know, what engineering impacts are you actually looking to achieve? How do you measure success purely from an engineering perspective? And unsurprisingly, everyone focuses first on greater throughput and speed. And I think that's been the general frame around how these tools, the benefits, the early stage benefits that teams can see, whether it's kind of basic task execution or just the acceleration of value delivery. How do we get more out of the current, you know, development group that we have today? How can we utilize these tools to drive better efficiency and ultimately allow us to generate and deliver more value to our customers? That's number 1. Greater focus on on value adding work. So that's one that definitely stands out here. I would say probably quite consistent with the other one as well. Definitely the audience today on the call has a lot more focus on reducing technical debt. And I know from a lot of my conversations with the clients on the call today, that's been certainly one of the key areas that you focused on first in your rollouts, right? So it makes, you know, doesn't surprise me in some way that's factored in. A lot of focus really on focusing on developer satisfaction and attracting talent, certainly much more so than this face-to-face in Munich. And I think that's a really important part. We're seeing more and more from our customers and from other folks that we're talking to that AI isn't just about helping us deliver value quickly or being able to deliver more value to our customers, but it's also becoming a really important way to retain good talent and to attract new talent, because developers are, you know, many developers want to work in innovative environments where people are utilizing the latest technologies. And that's where at the core of really a lot of recruitment and retention strategies overall. In terms of the business outcomes, just kind of going through both of these at the same time. So let me process these both at the same time. So certainly when we met with the CIOs and the CTOs, the 2 main focal points for them were speed to market and cost reduction. Now, as part of the cost reduction conversation, what was interesting is it was not so much a headcount reduction, right? Much more so actually a tooling reduction, tooling consolidation or rationalization from their perspective, which is we have a lot of tools that we need to support a traditional engineering process. With the advent of AI, with the usage of these tools, in theory, we should be able to start to minimize some of the exposure, some of the costs that we distribute across some of the other tools to assist with that development process. Um, I have no doubt in my mind that with this huge shift towards AI, there will be a whole new suite of different types of tools, particularly on security and risk management, that are going to be introduced into the space, which almost by definition, you need to have that independence and separation. But a cost reduction definitely features quite heavily. Speed to market, I think very consistent, as well as customer satisfaction. So I think broadly speaking, we see the same sort of responses from, you know, the webinar that we're hosting today versus the CTO and CIO session that we had in Munich. Sorry, a little transition here. What are the biggest barriers that you're facing? So number one on here actually today is workflow and process, right? Whereas folks that we spoke to, and this might be informed a little bit by the fact that it was very CIO heavy, which has a different set of a different scope of factors that the CIOs typically look after and think about. They were very heavy on the compliance and the governance and the risk side of things. Folks on the call here today more focused on workflow and process, although governance and compliance is not far behind in terms of that. Code base and architecture feature quite heavily in today's conversation. I think that probably reflects a little bit of where everyone today on the call is on that journey. The further you go into the journey, the more you're going to actually face some of these constraints. So it doesn't surprise me that code base and architecture is coming up more and more so with folks in the call today. And then training and culture really go hand in hand in some ways. You see that consistency here. So hopefully that's, it's kind of, at the very least interesting to kind of get a perspective of everyone, on the call today and where different folks are on their journey and what they're focused on against the conversation we had. Now, the next part of this is going to be some conversations around how do we start to think about how we accelerate our transition to an AI augmented engineering, right? So we've been doing a lot of thinking around this in the kind of broader plan deck context of how to help our clients start to think about how we structure and set ourselves up for success on this journey. So let me just pull in the one thing here. So the first thing I would focus on first is if AI is an accelerant to productivity overall, it does beg the question, how do we define productivity in the first place, right? In the plan deck, we have a very strong view on the 4 pillars of productivity. This is featured in our 2025 benchmarks and will be updated in the new version of the 2026 benchmarks, which will be launched next month. But ultimately, in the end of the day, if you're trying to understand if something is accelerating something, you need to be able to define that. So being able to understand what it is that drives the right focus, the right speed, quality, predictability, or whatever, you need to come up with a framework that allows you to set and baseline exactly where you are today. You able to track and drive productivity so that you understand as you move different levers, including AI, how that influences different aspects of how your teams operate today. Now, within that, being able to overlay a Gen AI tool, right? So if I can understand what these teams are utilizing this tool, what is the impact it's having is really, really important, right? So I can then see directly how does the adoption of Copilot or Cursor or Devin or Claude or Windsurf, the variety of the tools that we support, as we see different teams using different aspects of these tools, how are they using them? What constraints are we facing? And how is that then ultimately enabling us to start to change how we deliver software? How does that impact the SDLC, our engineering and delivery metrics? And from there, ultimately, it's about that North Star of the proportion of time that we're able to focus on delivering value for our customers, right? So how do I then link that through to the ultimate kind of metric within those 4 pillars, which is our focus on delivering value for our customers? How is it that we can accelerate delivery, which gives us back more capacity to focus on the things that matter most, which ultimately comes down to increasing our revenues as a business, digging a deeper moat around the revenues that we have today, and then being able to communicate that more broadly. So it's really important to establish the foundations of productivity, be able to measure that, and then be able to understand the engagement and use of these tools and how they're starting to influence both positively and negatively, right? Because it's not that you use the tools and everything improves overnight. You might see quality start to dip at first as teams start to utilize it. So it's important to be able to measure that, put those hand in hand. So without further ado, so the RACER framework is something that we've been developing with our clients, quite frankly, over the last few months. And we're going to be running another webinar going into much more detail on this next month. But really, this is how we think about that transition. There are a lot of CTOs that we speak to, or engineering leaders that we speak to today. They're under the pressure of, hey, I bought a bunch of licenses. Where's my 10x productivity? And quite frankly, it's not as simple as that. So the very basics that any organization needs to be able to understand is we've invested in some tools, we've invested in some licenses in these tools. Are we using it? It sounds like a very basic question, but it's a very important question. I'm sure everyone here has asked themselves, at least at the outset of this journey. Secondly, is the approach. How are we using these tools? Are we using them in such a way that we're setting ourselves up for success that we can utilize them most effectively? Okay. Thirdly is the constraints. And this is really, I think, key for us and a really important introduction to this framework is as we're starting to utilize these, we think more effectively, what are the barriers that we're facing? Where are we running into problems, whether it's cultural or training or code base or process, or whatever it might be, being able to actually sit down, identify these, document them, and then treat them as any other backlog that you would burn down. So you give yourself the best ability to move into the engineering impact, where you can then start to then measure against the 4 pillars or whatever productivity framework you would like to use, what impact this is having on the SDLC. I always think about these two very closely intertwined. It's not a sort of sequential moving through these steps phases, but oftentimes the benefit of having something like a productivity framework and being able to look at these SDLC metrics is that it allows you to, we have a hypothesis that by doing X, Y, and Z, it's going to help us increase our cycle time. If cycle time is not increasing or different aspects of cycle time is not improving, why is that? And that's going to help you uncover even further constraints. So the metrics are not only a really good way of being able to evidence the impact in the transition you're having, but where you're not having a positive impact, why is that? Will help you uncover really critical constraints that you then need to then go through and address and manage down. And then ultimately, as you drive better efficiency, better speed to market, better quality, better predictability, ultimately this is going to translate into a higher proportion of your time focused on delivering value for your customers. There's a strong correlation between the proportion of time that we have to focus on delivering value and how efficiently we work as an engineering function underneath that. So being able to then translate those SDLC metrics into a view that shows that you can optimize that time focused on delivering value and give yourself the best chance of success is really important. So this is our new RACER framework, which is definitely going to be, with the amount of customers that we have in this thing today, it's something that you're going to start to see more and more in the product and plan deck on a day-to-day basis as we build more of these features and functionality into the thing. But if you're not a plan deck customer, hopefully you'll find this is a very kind of well thought out, well-structured approach to thinking about what are the different stages that you need to measure it. And again, in January, we'll go through this in more detail and look at actually some of the data points that you need to measure across each one of these different categories. Now, for the rollout perspective, just to kind of give you a sense of what does this look like. So very simply, we've invested in a bunch of tools. Are we using these tools? How many people are using them every week? How many people are using them every day? What does this look like as us transitioning from we bought some tools and every now and then we use them or we play around with them to actually these are becoming fundamentally ingrained tools that we use within our SDLC, our engineering processes. Our approach, so whether it's again looking at acceptance rates or ratios of developers to agents or understanding your lines changed, understanding exactly how teams are using them, which LLMs are, currently have the best preferences because these LLMs are evolving very quickly. They're leapfrogging each other. We constantly see in our customer data that what was popular this month is not popular next month, right? I don't think if I say Claude, for instance, and Sonnet had nowhere near the popularity it has today across our customer base 3 or 4 months ago, but they've made some tremendous strides over the last few months that has really driven adoption across our customer base, and we can see that coming through in the data. What's really important, I think, is these user activity patterns. So you look at high activity, regular users, occasional users. We have this both at an individual level, as well as a team level. As a technology leader, the best way for me to drive adoption across my organization is to have some really strong success stories within my organization. And so being able to identify the high activity users and the regular users give you a good opportunity to identify where those success stories are so that we can learn from each other and we can really promote the use and successful use cases across the organization. Likewise, it helps you identify where people might need some further support, whether that's training or encouragement or whatever it might be. You can get a good understanding from a team by team perspective or an individual perspective where they should look at. Now, the constraints, I've listed here a lot of the constraints that we see across our customer base. This is by no means exhaustive. It's more illustrative, but you will, collectively probably recognize most, if not all of these in some way, shape, or form within your organization. The important thing is turning these from anecdotal comments, as you're walking through the hallways or on a Zoom call or a Teams call or whatever, to actually something that's structured. How are we documenting these? How are we categorizing these? How do we know which AI tools have the highest number of constraints against them? How do we know if actually culture is our biggest category of constraints at the moment, or if it's tooling, or if it's workflows, right? Being able to structure these and understand them in a way that makes sense, you can action them, leads to you being able to make better decisions around which tools you want to invest in the future and what areas you need to focus on to really be able to maximize the value that these tools can potentially bring, right? It's only once you address those, you have a chance of really transitioning many teams to a more AI augmented organization on a sustainable basis. Engineering impact. So we've listed quite an extensive amount of engineering impact here. What you're going to see coming through to the product over the next number of months is real focus on the benchmarks and the 4 pillars of productivity. But really, there's kind of 2 sides of this. One is delivery impact. So understanding from kind of the core delivery metrics over time, how is this helping us to accelerate? Now, AI is not the only thing that teams have at their disposal. It's not the only thing that's changing. So this is not about trying to attribute things specifically to AI. I think that's actually quite difficult over a long period of time because you're going to have a lot of variables over that period of time. And it's going to take time to drive that change. But being able to understand how that adoption over time, usage over time, that mastery from an operational perspective over time helps us to continue to drive better trends on delivery is really important. And on the quality side, making sure that you can track, not only how quickly we can respond to these issues and how AI might be helping us doing that, but also escape defects or other quality issues that might be generated because, I would say almost every single customer and every single team that we've looked at that's been on this journey has had a negative impact on quality at the outset. And that's not a surprise because it is changing the way that we're working. It is changing how we review PRs, what we need to think about, what different people need to do, our reliance on these tools to supplement certain aspects of thinking that maybe historically we did, which has both negative and positive impacts. So being able to understand what the trend is and the quality perspective is really important. And then it goes through a number of other there as well. And then ultimately the business results, right? So this aligns very much with everyone's kind of polling response today. When we think about what are the things that matter the most, speed to market is really critical, not only in terms of how long it takes us to build something, but ultimately what proportion of our time we can then focus on value add work. That's very important. Customer satisfaction is absolutely critical, right? We know that there is a tight correlation with deployment frequency and customer satisfaction that allows you to be able to trend that. And then cost reduction, whether this is headcount reduction or tooling rationalization. From the customers that we're working with today, one of the key things that we're seeing is kind of 2025 was the year of learning how to use these tools. 2026, their themes are really focused on how do we productionize the use of these tools and drive more AI augmentation at scale across our organization. And then for 2027, maybe there's a CTO I know that will admit this out loud, is the year that they're looking at potentially cost reduction, and I don't mean that in terms of a headcount reduction and the hesitancy towards that, but more in the sense that from a budgeting perspective, obviously you don't want to necessarily relinquish all of your budget early stage, but that's the year where we're kind of learning about the tools, professionalizing how we use these tools at scale, and then starting to really achieve the benefits in 2027. That's where a lot of mentality and focus is with a lot of our customers today, at least from the conversations that we're having. So I think that takes me through everything today. I know Charlie spoke a little bit about who we are and what we do. For folks that don't know, Plantic is what we call an SEI tool, software intelligence engineering, or software engineering intelligence tool, rather. And think of it as a sort of intelligence layer that sits over, yes, SDLC tools that you use, or the tools that teams use to build software. It extracts the data and helps present better visibility and understanding into, are we delivering things the right way? Are we focused on the right things? Are we delivering things at the right time? And we do a lot of that against the backdrop of this productivity pillars that we're quite passionate about, right? Making sure the teams are focused in the right area, delivering as quickly and efficiently as possible, driving good predictability is kind of core aspect of their DNA, and obviously managing quality, not just as a building a quality product, which is very important, but understanding that actually being quite responsive to defects and quality issues gives you a better opportunity to maximize the time that you have focused for delivering value for your customers. So that's the kind of the pitch there. But I guess there is a Q&A box, which I think there's a couple of questions that have come through. But if anybody else has any questions, please feel free to ask. I'm going to stop sharing the slides at the moment so we can have a conversation, but I can, you know.
Are we seeing a couple of questions?
Yeah, so Farah's is what are the top leading indicators or signals that agentic AI is going well in an organization? How can we track this and plan that as agentic AI continues to become a larger part of the SDLC? So I think that this probably came up a little bit before, maybe around the same time that we started looking at the RACER framework. But what I would focus on, first and foremost, at a very basic level, whether it's agentic or Gen AI tools, is really that adoption and usage, right? And so, what proportion of PRs are human authored, are purely agent authored, or agent assisted, is a very good indicator of this. Some of our clients are currently utilizing tagging back into Jira or ADO to be able to look at a very similar bit as it relates to the stories, right? So how many stories are being delivered through AI or not part of AI? There's a new bit that's going to be coming in next year, which is going to be allow you to look at the relationship between your developers and agents in flight, as well as the efficiency and the usage of different currencies across different of these products. So they all have slightly different financial models, but from a token perspective, think about that. What is the efficiency of the use of that? Those will give you some very good early indicators, I think, of where you are in that journey and how you're setting yourself up for success. And also, I think probably answers a little bit of that second question. Neelam, has anything to add to that, Charlie, before I move on to the next one?
No, I think that's eloquently put, William.
Chris Ruddy has asked me, when am I heading up to Newcastle? That is not soon enough, Chris. Neelam has asked, how do you calculate usage of tools? So we saw kind of a very brief screenshot, but essentially what Plan Deck would allow you to do, or what you can do if you're so desired to actually build integrations against the APIs yourselves, which why would you do that if there's a tool that does it for you, would be my argument. But the usage of the tools at a very basic level, most of our clients and what we're building into this framework is start with weekly usage, but then quickly transfer to daily usage. So how many people are using it on a weekly basis? How many people are using it on a daily basis? Within that, there's the sort of intensity of use, and that's going to be measured in different ways, whether it's a Gen AI tool or an agentic AI tool. But as part of what Plandeck will be able to show you is that sort of on one axis, the frequency of usage, and the other axis, the intensity of usage. So you can actually start to see from an individual perspective or from a team perspective, which one of my teams are going to be sort of leading the charge, if you will, in terms of the adoption users. So I would think about those two axes, really. The usage of the tool is from a frequency basis. Are we using it every day? That gives me some good indication that it's part of our daily operations, part of how we work. And then the other aspect of it is the intensity of usage. And that's a harder one to answer because that's calculated in different ways for different tools. But you could look at that from a suggestions and acceptances. You could use it from token utilization, from some of the agentic tools. So it kind of varies on that. From Mark Spiteri, do you have any advice on how to guide a business that is still at the early trial stage? Is there anyone who can handhold them through an adoption program? So at the risk of shameless self-promotion, but I do appreciate the question mark. That is why we built the RACER framework, and that's why we're building it into the product. So the advice I would give is to think about the journey to Gen AI augmentation through not necessarily the sequential stages, because I think there's a lot of overlap, but start to think about, okay, we've bought some licenses. Are we using those licenses? Make sure you've got that in a good position. How are we using that? And what sort of overall contribution is that making to our code base and to the work that we're delivering? That's really important. what constraints are we facing, and really fighting quite hard, because I think the inertia is for us to talk about these things, have a moan about these things. We're not always great at documenting these things, right? Because we're focused on other aspects of what we're doing, and it's easier to just kind of have a bit of a moan about, oh, this doesn't work because of this, because of this. Really focus your organizations on, no, don't just say that. Put that down. Let's document that. Let's have a list of our constraints and understand which tools present the greatest number of constraints, which ones present the least amount of constraints, what categories, tooling, culture, training, so on and so forth, and then have conversations and programs of work around how do we burn those down to do that.
Can I add one thing to
Yeah,
that, to Mark? Because I suppose philosophically, all I'd say is that the advice to anyone is this is not a BAU challenge. This is systemic change that requires kind of extracurricular focus and project management and thought. So it seems to me anyone who's embarking on this journey, the first thing that the leadership have to do is say, right, we're going to need to dedicate some thought, uh, some program management and some tooling and to give us the measurement and the framework and the time we need to do this properly. But if people think you can busk it in BAU, I think that's the biggest danger. This requires proper time extracurricularly, and no one has extracurricular time because they were all very busy. But I think, therefore, there needs to be some governance, some tooling, and some investment around transitioning in a very structured and focused way that is highly visible, and we're managing the risks and we're optimizing the upside, and it's very transparent, and we're communicating effectively to stakeholders and so on. So I think it's just that it lands that this is a big deal that is extracurricular. That's
absolutely.
my observation.
It's very good, Ben. Um, Neelam said, so when I say usage, is it just visiting or entering the prompts? So usage is usage, and that means something slightly different for different tools. So for instance, using Copilot in the assistant mode is different from using Devin in the agentic mode. The point being is, am I using them? From a usage perspective, it is not just logging into the tools. That's one thing. Usage in terms of, am I interacting with inline prompts, right? On a just usage perspective. That's one way of starting to think about usage from sort of measuring, as say, a frequency or intensity. And James asked a similar question, so I'll get to that in a second. Usage is also a proportion of what we do. So I think it's not just, am I using these tools, but am I using the tools in a way that's helping actually start to influence how we work and what we're building? And that can be evidenced in lines of code, not the best, but a way. Proportion of PRs that are AI generated versus human generated, as well as the work that we're doing. So what proportion of our work? So when usage has kind of multiple meanings, and there's a kind of a literal usage of, am I using a tool, but then am I using a tool in a way that's having a material impact in what we're building, what we're PRs that we're merging, code that we're merging, or tickets that we're delivering is really important. And then from James, your question. So can I track intensity and frequency of usage right now in Plan Deck? Yes, you can. You can definitely track the frequency of usage. You can look at it on a per person basis across a variety of different tools. So you can definitely see that. The intensity one is a module that we're actually building right now for Q1 of next year. So it'll be, our clients more than happy to kind of give you a sneak preview of what this looks like. But essentially what you'll be able to see is a scatter plot view of those two things, and you'll be able to measure that, be able to identify where teams are in that sort of quadrants, if you will, as well as individuals within that as well. Michael Vasson, can you share honestly your own story where Plan Deck as an engineering organization is in this AI adoption? That's a great question. I like that. So where are we on the journey? So earlier part of this year, we started using agentic tools a lot more, and it plays a major role right now in our product design process. So some of our clients will have seen this already. We have a whole prototyping area where everything that we do now is done through Cursor, right, from a product design perspective. So we don't do product design anymore in the sort of old school way of, documenting everything first, a couple of Miro designs or Figma designs. Everything is prototyped. We have how does that transition into engineering? That's a bit more of a mixed bag. There are certain aspects of that that we can transition actually quite easily and quite efficiently based on certain shared components and policies that we have within our code base and our component design. Other bits, especially when they're greenfield, is a little bit more a little bit more tricky because they're not based on that component library. So to answer your question succinctly, I would probably say I know in Q2 this year, 50% of the stuff that we delivered was delivered with agentic assistance in some aspect, shape, or form. Q3 was about the same, and Q4, that number has increased to about 70%. Okay, so we've got quite a bit. Now, is it perfect? Are we sort of a fully agentic, everything's no, of course not. There are some technical challenges that you need to do, especially when you're doing greenfield development, that you don't have necessarily a full library of things that you can rely on to be able to translate from prototype into production ready code. But we, like everyone else, are very much on that journey. We've got 8 minutes left. I need to take a breath. Joe has asked, the AI dashboards in Plan Deck were great. Okay, thank you. He says they're great. Thank you, Joe. A couple of questions. Can we get Windsurf and Claude Code integration? Those are currently in beta right now, Joe, so we'll follow up with you to get you included in that beta program. Can we get a consolidated view across multiple tools rather than split out by tool? Want to be able to measure overall net benefit, especially in some cases we have energy. So the good thing, Joe, both of your questions we kind of do today. Obviously, one of them is in a beta program, so we'll get you included in that. The other bit, let's follow up with you on that directly because you should be able to see that right now. But maybe having that Windsurf and Claude data will bring that to life a little bit more because you might just inadvertently you might only have one tool integrated while the other ones are actually in beta. So once we get multiple ones, you'll be able to see that centralized view. So we'll definitely reach out to you afterwards. Can we see comment count trend increase, decrease after adapting? See an increase or degraded efficiency in code review phase. So it's a good question. So we go back and forth a lot on comment count.
I don't think we heard what the question was.
Oh, sorry. The question was, can we see comment count trend after trying to adopt AI supported development for pull requests and Plan Deck? So basically, can I see the comment activity so I can understand as we move through this journey what impact it's having on our overall code review process? So it's a very good question. I think we've gone back and forth a little bit on comment count because a lot of the customers that we work with today, developers don't interact through comments. So it is an important metric, I think, for some organizations where the far majority of activity actually goes through comments. Most of our comments that we've spoken to and surveyed so far as part of our product development process, a lot of that commentary and a lot of those happen on Teams, they happen in Slack. So we haven't actually incorporated the comment count as such. But what you can see is as you look at the sort of process that the PR is going through, what you can see in Plan Deck is the time it's spent being reviewed versus waiting to be approved versus being merged. And you can start to see how that time is being influenced. So it's not reliant on the specific comments itself, but it will give you an indication of what impact this is having on the overall review process. And I think one of the interesting things, if I may throw it out there as well, that we've seen a couple of clients experimenting with is using an agentic tool like Devin as part of the code generation building process, and then using another tool like CodeRabbit and having those two interact with each other with a more senior experienced engineer actually kind of reviewing what those two are up to as they kind of bring through and iterate on a PR to actually get it to this point in time where it can be approved. Which is a very interesting dynamic. I don't have a lot of data on that quite yet, but a very, very interesting use case nonetheless. And then lastly, by Tim Reed, from your experience, what key process changes have teams adopted that have seen a productivity shift? For example, regular discussion, using AI agents to create PRs for refactors, tech debt, or innovation culture. What advice would you give to individual teams to improve their usage of tooling? That's a big question, team. So I think there are two kind of areas where we've seen the biggest transformation. One is the product design process, and that's probably the biggest one that we've seen for folks that are using Cursor or tools like that within the product design process, and actually how quickly they're able to build and iterate on prototypes that can be socialized with customers. That is a really, 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 really important process change. The ability to actually generate these things and start interacting with your customers, getting feedback, continuing to iterate and get something, that's probably the single biggest area from a process change. I know your question was probably more related to engineering, I think, maybe, I don't know, but that's probably the biggest one that we've seen. I think the second biggest area has been the pull request, the review process. And this has very much been because as these tools change the way that engineers, because it changes the way that we build and we write code, it then also fundamentally changes the way that we review code. Okay. And certain organizations have used tools like CodeRabbit to help augment that. Um, Others have relied a little bit more, but what that means is we've seen definitely the review process for PRs slow down at first as people kind of adjust to reviewing a new type of code and a new type of conversation, and then that can particularly speed up. Um, I think the other area, lastly, that we've seen the big impact has been on technical debt, and that has been more not in a as a result of using AI, we have more or less technical debt, but more that a lot of our customers have started with technical debt as an entry point into how do we utilize these tools. So rather than trying to build up a lot of dependency on let's build a whole new bunch of new features using GenAI, how can we use technical debt, which in many cases is pretty well structured, well documented, well referenced, to be able to help us burn down a backlog of technical debt that we wouldn't otherwise get to because we still want to remain very focused on delivering new value. So this has allowed some of those organizations to essentially increase capacity to focus on burning down technical debt without having a material impact on their roadmap or their customers from a new feature perspective. Uh, Samuel Vanini. Is there a
Thanks
way?
for the last question, William. I think then our time is up.
Yeah, I think so. There's loads of questions. So, listen, before I answer this, we would be more than delighted to continue this conversation. So if I don't get to your question today, please feel free to reach out to myself or to Charlie, or if you're a Planet customer today, reach out to Daoud or Harneet or Pranav, whoever you work with, and we'd be delighted to
Yeah, and for new customers or new potential customers, we can circulate the slides from today if of interest. We can continue this conversation. We're very passionate about this stuff and just happy to help in any way we can. So I know with GDPR and everything, it's very hard for us to come to you, but so if you could let us know if you would like the slides. Do we have a way of doing that? An email?
Yeah,
I'm
we'll follow up with everyone who attended or
Yeah,
didn't attend today for that matter. We'll send you a link to the recording once it's posted. And we can also
yeah,
attach the slides to that as well. No problem.
very good.
So Samuel, very briefly, I won't be able to go into detail in the answer to this, but you asked, is there a way to track or obtain an aggregate view of which tickets or bugs are related to AI tools? And the answer to that is yes, but it's not native out of those AI tools. There's a little bit of work that various customers that we work with today have done to be able to then link those two together to see in a quite easy way. Part of it depends on what tool you're using. Some of those tools make that very simple. Sometimes you have to have the assistance of a bit of a script or a bit of a mapping, but we can definitely help you do that. Um, and then, yes, and unfortunately, I probably won't have time to go through all of that, but we did cover that a bit today. But I'd be more than delighted to follow up on that conversation with you if you would like. But I think it's we're at time now. Thank you everyone for spending an hour. Really, really appreciate it. It's a good conversation. We love having this conversation with our customers and our new potential customers. So as Charlie said, if there's any questions that anyone has, please do reach out. And yeah, anything else you want to say, Charlie, to close this off?
No, thanks to everybody. That was William Lytle, our COO. I'm Charlie, our CEO, and we are delighted to continue this conversation. So many thanks to all for joining.